He found an Apache woman collapsed in the snow. Hours later, she claimed half his land. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to today's story. It was the dead of winter, and the wind howled across the open plains, making the landscape look like a frozen wilderness. The kind of place where you'd expect nothing more than the loneliness of the wild. The kind of place where men like Jebediah Turner, a solitary rancher, went to escape the world. Jebediah had long chosen the life of isolation, seeking peace on his ranch, far away from the bustling towns and the conflicts that seemed to find their way into every corner of society. He wasn't a man of many words, nor did he care for company. His only companion was the hard work that came with ranching. That morning, as Jebediah was gathering firewood from the thick pine trees near his homestead, he noticed something unusual. Through the swirling snow, he saw what appeared to be a figure, barely visible in the white expanse. His first thought was that it was just another wandering animal, perhaps a deer lost in the storm. But as he squinted against the biting wind, he realized it was something far more alarming. A woman. She was lying face down in the snow, her body barely moving. Jebediah's heart raced, and without hesitation, he dropped the firewood and sprinted toward her, cursing under his breath. He knew the land was treacherous this time of year, and anyone caught out in it could easily succumb to the cold. As he reached her, he knelt down and turned her over gently. Her skin was pale, lips tinged blue, and her breath shallow. She was an Apache woman, her long black hair tangled and matted with snow. Jebediah didn't hesitate. He scooped her up into his arms and carried her back to his cabin, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? How had she ended up so far from any Apache tribe in the middle of this storm? He had heard of skirmishes between settlers and the Apache, but he never thought he'd be the one to find a woman in such a dire state. He laid her on his bed, covered her with blankets, and stoked the fire to keep her warm. Hours passed before she finally stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked around the room, confusion and fear flickering in her gaze. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak, barely a whisper. "You saved me," she said softly, her words carrying an accent he hadn't heard before. Jebediah's response was simple. "You're safe now." He offered her a drink of water, and she accepted it gratefully. As she drank, she seemed to gather her thoughts. Then, her eyes met his again, this time with an intensity that made Jebediah's stomach tighten. "You saved my life," she repeated. "And for that, I will claim what is rightfully mine." Jebediah froze, not sure what she meant by that. She continued, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Half of your land. It is now mine, as part of the Apache tribe's honor code." The words struck him like a lightning bolt. Claim his land. She was delirious, he thought. He had saved her life, and this was the thanks he got? But the look in her eyes told him she wasn't joking. It was then that he realized the gravity of the situation. Jebediah was no fool. He had heard of Apache customs, of the importance of honor among their people, but he never expected to be part of it. Was she serious? Had he just unknowingly entered into some sort of agreement that bound him to her tribe? As the snowstorm continued to rage outside, Jebediah sat by the fire, his mind racing with the possibilities of what had just unfolded. Was this some sort of Apache tradition? Or was she simply trying to get something for herself, using the fact that he had saved her as leverage? One thing was certain. His quiet life, his peaceful ranch, had just been irrevocably changed. As the storm continued to howl outside, Jebediah sat there, stunned, watching the Apache woman. He had just saved her life, and now she claimed half of his land. It was a strange feeling, a mixture of disbelief and confusion. He was no stranger to the hardships of the frontier, but this was something he hadn't prepared for. His life was about to change, and not just in the way he had ever imagined. He looked at her, her dark eyes still locked onto his, waiting for a response. But what could he say? How could he make sense of her claim? She was barely conscious, yet she spoke with the kind of certainty that made him question everything he thought he knew. She had said it in such a matter-of-fact way, as if it were just the way things were supposed to be. "I am Apache, she repeated softly, as if reminding him of the law she believed bound them together. You saved my life. Now you owe me. Jebediah shook his head, the weight of her words sinking in. He had heard of the Apache way, of their fierce sense of honor, but he had never imagined it would cross paths with his own life in such a direct manner. He had helped her, yes, but claim his land? It seemed impossible. Yet there was something in her demeanor that suggested she wasn't just speaking in metaphor. The law she spoke of was real, in her eyes at least. As the hours passed, Jebediah did what he did best. He worked. He chopped more wood, fed his horses, and checked the fences. But his mind was elsewhere, constantly returning to the woman inside his cabin and the strange demand she had made. The night grew colder, and the fire crackled in the hearth. Jebediah sat down, the weight of the situation pressing on him. He couldn't just ignore her words. He had to figure out what this meant. Was she truly claiming half his land, or was this some sort of misunderstanding? He had heard of Apache tribes, of their customs, but he had never imagined his life would be intertwined with theirs in this way. The next morning, when the storm had finally passed and the sun began to break through the clouds, Jebediah went inside to check on the Apache woman. She had slept fitfully, her face pale, but she was awake now. She looked at him with those same intense eyes, as if she were waiting for him to make the next move. Have you decided? She asked, her voice still weak, but firm. What do you mean? Jebediah asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I saved your life. Now, you claim half my land. She nodded slowly, her expression never changing. It is the Apache way. You saved me. Now, I claim what is mine. Jebediah's mind raced. He had worked his whole life for this land, this small piece of the frontier that he had carved out for himself. It wasn't much, but it was his. Could he really give half of it to a woman he barely knew? Someone who wasn't even from his world? He wasn't sure what to make of it, but one thing was clear. This wasn't going to be an easy decision. He had always believed that his land, his livelihood, was something to be protected at all costs. But now, this woman had turned his world upside down. Was this some form of justice? Was she really entitled to half of what he had? Or was it just a claim born from desperation? As the days passed, Jebediah couldn't shake the feeling that something far bigger than a land dispute was at play here. He began to notice things about her, the way she moved, the way she spoke, the authority in her voice. She wasn't just any Apache woman. She was someone important, someone with power in her own right. It wasn't long before he realized that her claim wasn't just about land. It was about something much deeper, something tied to her heritage, her people, and their relationship with the land itself. Jebediah knew this wasn't just a fight for property. It was a battle for something that went beyond ownership, beyond borders. And he was caught in the middle of it, whether he liked it or not. Days passed, and Jebediah found himself caught in a whirlwind of thoughts he could barely control. The Apache woman, whose name he had learned was Kaya, was no ordinary woman. There was an air about her that demanded respect, something beyond her fierce beauty and the strange claim she had made. Every time she looked at him, her eyes seemed to pierce right through him, as if she could see into the very depths of his soul. She wasn't just a survivor of the storm. She was a leader, a figure of power in her own right. Jebediah had seen her rise from the bed, weak and trembling from the cold, to someone who moved with the kind of grace and authority that could command a room. It was becoming clear that her request wasn't a mere demand. It was part of something much bigger, something tied to her people, to the Apache tribe, and to the land itself. Kaya's claim was not just about taking half his land. It was a symbol of a deeper bond, an unspoken agreement between them. It was a call for respect and recognition of her people's rights to the land they had once roamed freely. Jebediah's mind was a battlefield, torn between his own pride and the realization that he had unknowingly entered a much larger struggle. He had always prided himself on his independence, his ability to build something from nothing, to carve a life out of the unforgiving wilderness. But now, faced with Kaya's claim, he wondered if it had all been in vain. Was he really in control of his own fate, or had the past come back to claim what it was owed? The next few days were filled with silence. Kaya spent most of her time in the cabin, resting and recovering from the harsh conditions she had endured. Jebediah kept to his routine, but his mind was never far from her. Every time he walked past her, he felt the weight of her gaze on him, as if she were silently assessing his every move. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, Kaya spoke again. This time, her voice was firm, no longer weak from exhaustion. "The land is ours," she said simply, her eyes steady. Jebediah froze for a moment, feeling a chill run down his spine. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "You've been generous in saving my life," Kaya continued. "But the land is part of a larger agreement, one that extends beyond just the two of us. It's about the survival of our people, the preservation of our way of life." Jebediah stood there, speechless, trying to grasp the full weight of her words. This wasn't just about him. This was about her people, her tribe, and the land that had been theirs for generations. Kaya's ancestors had roamed this land freely, hunting, gathering, living in harmony with nature. And now, they were being pushed to the brink, forced to fight for their rights, for their survival. "I understand that," Jebediah finally said, his voice low. "But I've worked hard for this land. It's all I have. I can't just give it away." Kaya's gaze softened, but there was no sign of pity in her eyes. "You don't have to give it away," she said quietly. "You have a choice. But know this, what you give now will come back to you tenfold. The land, the people, the future, everything is connected. This is not just about land. It's about something greater." Jebediah felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had always believed in the idea of fairness, of working hard for what you earned. But now, standing in front of this woman, he realized that life wasn't always that simple. There were forces at play far beyond his control. As he looked at Kaya, he saw something that made him hesitate, a strength, a quiet dignity that spoke of generations of people who had survived against all odds. She wasn't asking for his land out of greed or desire for power. She was asking because it was part of something larger, something that was beyond him. That night, as Jebediah lay in his bed, he thought about what Kaya had said. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the land wasn't just his. It was part of something much bigger, something he hadn't fully understood. As the wind howled outside and the moon cast its pale light over the frozen plains, Jebediah knew that his life, his choices, and his future were no longer entirely his own. The land, the people, and the Apache woman were all part of a story that had been written long before he had arrived on these shores. And now, it seemed, it was his turn to play a part in that story. Days passed, and Jebediah found himself caught in a storm of thoughts. The land, the claim, and Kaya's words weighed heavily on his mind. The sun rose and set, the cold wind still howling across the plains, but the stillness in his cabin was suffocating. He had never felt so torn. The life he had worked so hard for, his land, his cattle, his independence, now seemed uncertain. Kaya had made it clear that the Apache way was not just about taking what was owed. It was about restoring balance. He could see now that the claim was more than just a demand for land. It was about survival, about history, and about a future that was not just his own to decide. Kaya spent most of her time in the cabin, recovering, but she wasn't idle. She would occasionally walk outside to watch the land, her gaze as steady as ever. Sometimes, Jebediah would join her, though the silence between them spoke volumes. One afternoon, she finally spoke again. "This land is part of a greater story," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The Apache once roamed freely here. Our ancestors hunted these plains, and we lived in harmony with the earth. But that was before the settlers came, before the land was taken from us." Jebediah listened intently. He had heard the stories, the tension between settlers and the native tribes, the wars fought, the land stolen. But hearing it from Kaya made it feel real in a way he hadn't anticipated. "I didn't take your land," Jebediah said quietly, his voice steady but unsure. "I'm just trying to survive like everyone else. This place, it's everything I have." Kaya turned to face him, her eyes filled with a deep, ancient understanding. "I know," she said, "and I do not wish to take everything from you. I only ask for what is rightfully ours, what was taken from my people." Jebediah didn't reply immediately. He had always believed that survival was about working hard and claiming what you could. But what Kaya was asking for was not just about taking. It was about giving something back, about righting an old wrong. That night, as he lay in bed, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. Kaya's words echoed in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at a crossroads. There was no going back now. He had a choice to make, and it wasn't just about land. It was about honor, about justice, and about understanding a people's need to restore what had been lost. The next day, Jebediah made a decision. He went to the land that Kaya had claimed, half of his homestead, the part closest to the river, where the grass grew thick and the soil was rich. He stood there for a long time, looking at the land he had worked, the land that had given him everything he had. He had built this place with his own hands, and yet, standing there, he realized it had never truly been his alone. The land had always belonged to something greater, to a history he hadn't understood until now. Kaya came to him later that day, her expression unreadable. "You've thought about it," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Have you decided?" Jebediah took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I can't give you everything," he said, his voice steady. "But I'll give you what I can. Half of what I have here. It's yours, if it means something to you." Kaya's eyes softened, a quiet gratitude in them. "It does," she said. "This land holds more than just soil. It holds memories, and the future of my people. This is not just a gift, Jebediah. This is a step toward healing, toward understanding." Jebediah nodded slowly, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over him. It wasn't the end of the struggle, but it was a beginning. As the days turned to weeks, the dynamic between him and Kaya shifted. They began to work together, each respecting the other's role in the land's future. Jebediah no longer felt the burden of ownership so heavily. Instead, he felt like a steward, someone entrusted with the care of something far greater than himself. Kaya's presence was a constant reminder of the land's deeper significance, and he began to understand the value of what she had claimed. It wasn't about taking something from him. It was about restoring a balance, about honoring a past that had been forgotten. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Jebediah looked at Kaya and spoke. "You were right," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "This land, it's not just mine. It never was." Kaya met his gaze, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding." Weeks passed, and the seasons began to shift. The air grew warmer, and the land, once locked in the grip of winter's cold, started to breathe again. Spring came with a burst of life, green shoots pushing through the earth, flowers blooming, and the river that ran through the land swelling with the snow melt from the mountains. Jebediah and Kaya worked side by side, tending to the land, each in their own way. Kaya, with her knowledge of the earth, showed Jebediah new ways of planting, of caring for the soil, and of respecting the land that had given them both so much. She taught him how to work with nature, not just against it, and Jebediah, in turn, shared his skills with her, how to maintain the fences, how to care for the cattle, how to survive the harsh realities of frontier life. They were two people from different worlds, yet their bond over the land grew stronger with each passing day. Jebediah found himself thinking less about what he had lost and more about what he had gained. He had gained an understanding of the Apache way, of the deep respect for the land that Kaya held so dearly. But it wasn't just the land that had changed. Jebediah was changing too. He found himself more connected to the earth, more attuned to the rhythms of nature. There were days when he would sit by the fire, watching Kaya as she spoke with her people over the distance, communicating with them in a language he didn't understand, but felt the weight of. It was on one of those evenings that Jebediah realized just how much Kaya had given him. Not just the land, but a new purpose. "This is just the beginning," Kaya said one evening, her voice low and steady, as they sat by the fire. "You have done more than just share the land. You've helped restore something that was lost." Jebediah didn't respond immediately. He had always thought of himself as a man of action, someone who built and worked without asking too many questions. But now, with Kaya by his side, he realized there was so much more to life than simply surviving. "I never understood what it meant to truly honor the land," he said, his voice quiet but filled with meaning. "I just worked it, took what I needed. But you've shown me that it's about more than that." Kaya smiled, a soft, knowing smile, as she gazed into the fire. "It's about balance," she said simply. "Our people understood that long ago, but the world has forgotten. Now it's up to people like us to remember." The days grew longer, and the land that had once been a battleground for survival became a place of harmony. Jebediah and Kaya continued to work together, building something new. They weren't just building a life for themselves, They were building a future for those who had come before them and those who would come after. It wasn't easy. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt. There were those who opposed the alliance between a settler and an Apache woman, those who saw the world in black and white, who refused to see the shades of gray in between. But Jebediah and Caius stood firm. They knew that the future they were creating was one worth fighting for. One day, as they stood on the edge of the land, looking out at the fields they had worked together, Caius turned to Jebediah. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. Jebediah glanced at her, his brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" Caius's gaze was distant, as if she were looking beyond the horizon, beyond what was visible to the eye. "I mean the future," she said. "Our people have been fighting for so long, for so much. But what happens when the fighting stops? What happens when we finally have a chance to live without the weight of the past pressing down on us?" Jebediah was quiet for a moment, contemplating her words. It was a question he hadn't asked himself, not in those terms. But now, looking at Caius, at the life they were building together, he realized that the answer was simple. "We live," he said. "We live, and we make sure that the mistakes of the past don't define us. We make sure that the land, the people, and the future are treated with the respect they deserve." Caius nodded, a look of quiet satisfaction on her face. "Exactly," she said. "We live, and we make sure that those who come after us have something worth fighting for." The wind blew softly across the plains, carrying with it the scent of fresh earth and new beginnings. Jebediah and Caius stood together, looking out over the land they had worked, the land that had brought them together. It was no longer just his, no longer just hers. It was theirs, and it was theirs to protect, to nurture, and to honor, for the past, for the present, and for the future. The days grew warmer, and with the arrival of summer, Jebediah and Caius found themselves facing new challenges. As the land flourished with crops and cattle, so too did the responsibility that came with it. The partnership they had built was stronger than ever, but the weight of their shared future began to settle more heavily on Jebediah's shoulders. He had given part of his land to Caius, yes, but the more he worked with her, the more he realized that it wasn't just a physical gift he had given. It was a way of life, a shared bond that tied him to something much greater than himself. He couldn't help but wonder, though, how long could this peace last? It wasn't that he didn't trust Caius or her people. He had come to understand her beliefs, her fierce loyalty to the land, and her people's fight for survival. But the world around them was shifting. There were whispers of tension between settlers and native tribes. New settlers were arriving, eager to claim land and resources, unaware of the delicate balance that had been struck between Jebediah and Caius. One afternoon, as they worked together on the fields, Caius spoke, her voice tinged with concern. "There are those who do not understand what we've built here," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Jebediah paused, looking at her. "What do you mean?" Caius's eyes softened, but there was a hardness to her expression. "The land we share is still contested. There are others who would take it from us if they could, and the more settlers come, the more they push us into corners." Jebediah felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew the frontier was a dangerous place, full of tensions and conflicts. But he had hoped that the hard work he and Caius had put into building their life together would be enough to protect them from the storms that threatened to tear their world apart. "We'll be ready," Jebediah said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Caius nodded, but the uncertainty in her eyes told him that the challenges ahead were far from simple. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land, Jebediah sat by the fire, his thoughts heavy. Caius joined him, sitting quietly at his side. "Do you ever wonder if this will ever end?" Jebediah asked, his voice low. Caius looked at him, her expression unreadable. "The land has always been contested. It has always been a battle for survival. But what we have here, Jebediah, is more than land. It is trust. It is respect. And that is something no one can take from us." Her words, though simple, struck a chord deep within him. Trust. Respect. He had never thought about it that way before. He had always believed that survival was about owning land, building something tangible, something that could be passed down through generations. But now, he realized, it was about more than just ownership. It was about the bond that tied him to Caius, to her people, and to the land itself. The next day, A group of settlers arrived at the edge of Jebediah's land. They were loud and eager, talking about building houses and farms. Jebediah watched from a distance as they unloaded their belongings, their presence a stark reminder of the world outside the life he had built with Kaya. It wasn't long before they came to him, eager to strike a deal. "You've got a good piece of land here, mister," one of them said, tipping his hat. "We're looking to settle. You wouldn't mind selling a piece, would ya?" Jebediah felt the weight of their words, the pressure building. The land he had shared with Kaya was more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of something much deeper. The settlers didn't understand that. They saw it as a commodity, a piece of property that could be bought and sold. Kaya stood beside him, her posture tense. She had heard their words, too. "This land is not for sale," Jebediah said, his voice firm. The settlers didn't take kindly to his refusal. They argued, tried to persuade him, but Jebediah held his ground. Kaya's presence beside him gave him strength, a reminder of what they had built together. Finally, the settlers left, but Jebediah could feel the unease settling in his chest. This was just the beginning. The world outside was pressing in, and the future that he and Kaya had worked so hard to create was in jeopardy. Later that evening, Kaya spoke again, her voice quiet but resolute. "This is only the first of many," she said. "The settlers will keep coming. They always do." Jebediah nodded, understanding the weight of her words. But in that moment, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let them take what he had fought so hard to build. He wasn't going to let them take Kaya, or the land they shared, or the future they were creating. The battle for survival wasn't over yet, but this time, Jebediah was ready to fight for what mattered most. The days that followed were filled with tension. Jebediah and Kaya knew that the settlers would not give up easily, and they were right. The first wave of settlers came and went, but soon after, more arrived, bringing with them even larger groups, more supplies, and louder voices. Each day brought more pressure. Each day, the stakes grew higher. Kaya's instincts were sharp, and she could see the growing threat in the way the settlers looked at their land. Jebediah's resolve was being tested like never before. They couldn't ignore the reality any longer. They had to act. Jebediah spent long hours walking the land, thinking about the choices that lay before him. The choices were clear, but they were not simple. His pride told him to stand firm, to defend the land and everything he had built with Kaya. But as the settlers gathered at the edge of their property, his heart grew heavy. This was not just a matter of land. It was about protecting everything that had been built between them, the trust, the respect, and the promise of a future they had worked so hard to create. One morning, Kaya joined Jebediah as he walked the fields. "They will come for us, Jebediah," she said, her voice steady. "They will try to take what is ours, but we are stronger than they think." Jebediah turned to face her, his heart swelling with both pride and fear. "I won't let them take it, Kaya," he said, his voice resolute. "This land is ours. We've worked for it. We fought for it, and I'll protect it." Kaya smiled, a quiet understanding passing between them. "It's not just the land we must protect," she said softly. "It's everything we've built. It's the future we've created together, and that future is worth fighting for." That afternoon, the settlers made their move. A large group, led by a man named Clayton Ward, came to Jebediah's ranch. They were not armed with weapons, but their presence was a clear challenge. Clayton approached Jebediah, a smug smile on his face. "I told you we'd be back," Clayton said, his voice oozing with condescension. "This land is prime for farming. You've done well. But it's time to move on. You can't hold on to it forever." Jebediah stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest, but he was not afraid. "I've told you before, Clayton," Jebediah said firmly, his hand resting on the fence. "This land is not for sale. You will not take it." Clayton's smile faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "You're a stubborn man, Jebediah, but stubbornness won't keep you from losing everything. We have the law on our side. You're nothing but a lone settler in the middle of nowhere." Kaya stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "This land is part of something much bigger than you can understand," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It is not just soil to be claimed. It is a home to my people, to those who came before us and those who will come after. We will not let you take it." Clayton sneered, his eyes narrowing. "You really think your people can stop us?" he mocked. "The law is on our side. You'll be out of here before the week is over." Kaya met his gaze, her eyes cold. "We don't need the law to protect what is ours," she said, her voice filled with quiet strength. "What you don't understand is that we are not alone. This land is protected by those who have lived here long before you ever set foot on it." Clayton's expression soured, but he said nothing more. He knew he had underestimated them, and that was something he would not admit so easily. Jebediah watched as Clayton and his men turned and left, but the tension in the air was palpable. They would be back. It was only a matter of time. Kaya and Jebediah stood together, side by side, watching them go. "What now?" Jebediah asked quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. Kaya looked up at him, a spark of determination in her eyes. "Now we prepare. We don't just fight for the land, Jebediah. We fight for everything we've built, and we will not let it slip away." Jebediah nodded, a sense of purpose settling in his chest. He had never been one to back down from a fight. And this fight, this battle for their home, would be no different. The days ahead would be difficult, but they were ready. Together, they would face whatever came their way. Together, they would protect their land, their future, and each other. The tension between Jebediah and the settlers was reaching a boiling point. Every day, more and more of them arrived, bringing with them the promise of expanding into the land that had once been untouched, wild, and free. Jebediah could feel the weight of the future pressing down on him as he and Kaya prepared for what was to come. He had always prided himself on his independence, but now, standing alongside Kaya, he understood that his future wasn't just about what he could build alone. It was about what they could protect together. As the days wore on, Kaya's resolve grew stronger. She knew that the settlers were not just interested in land. They were after something much bigger. They wanted to change the very way the land was used, to shape it in their image, without understanding its true value. Jebediah had seen the greed in their eyes. He had seen the way they looked at the land, as though it was just a commodity to be bought and sold, and it filled him with a sense of unease. Kaya, on the other hand, saw the land as something sacred. It was part of the earth itself, and it carried the spirits of her ancestors, the ones who had lived in harmony with it for generations. It was a connection that went beyond ownership. One evening, as the sun began to set and the air grew cooler, Kaya stood by the edge of the land, looking out at the horizon. Jebediah joined her, standing quietly by her side. The land stretched out before them, golden in the fading light, peaceful and serene. But there was an undercurrent of tension in the air, a reminder of the storm that was coming. Kaya turned to Jebediah, her eyes filled with quiet determination. "They will come for us, Jebediah," she said, her voice steady. "They will not stop until they have what they want." Jebediah felt a knot form in his stomach. He had known this day would come, but now, standing here with Kaya, it felt like a heavy weight bearing down on him. "We won't let them take it," he said, his voice firm. Kaya nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "It's not just about stopping them," she said. "It's about what we stand for. It's about protecting this land, our people, and the future we are building together." Jebediah looked at her, his heart swelling with a sense of pride. He had always thought of himself as a protector of his land, but now, standing beside Kaya, he realized that this fight was bigger than just the two of them. It was about the survival of something far greater. They spent the next few days preparing. Jebediah worked tirelessly to reinforce the fences, while Kaya gathered supplies and spoke with her people, preparing them for the battle ahead. They knew it wouldn't be easy. The settlers were relentless, and they had the law on their side. But Jebediah and Kaya had something the settlers didn't: a deep connection to the land, to the history that flowed through it, and to the future they were determined to build together. As the days passed, the settlers grew more brazen. They made their presence known, drawing closer to the borders of Jebediah's land. One morning, they arrived in full force, their wagons lined up in the distance, and the sound of horses' hooves reverberating across the plains. Kaya and Jebediah stood side by side, ready to face them. The settlers, led by Clayton Ward, approached with their usual bravado. Clayton, as cocky as ever, rode up to Jebediah with a smug smile. "We're not going anywhere, Jebediah," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've had your chance. Now it's time for us to take what's ours." Jebediah stood tall, his chest swelling with pride. "This land isn't yours to take," he said, his voice steady and strong. "It never was." Clayton scoffed, shaking his head. You really think you can stop us? He sneered. We have the law on our side. We'll take this land from you one way or another. Kaya stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. You can take the land, but you'll never take the spirit of it, she said, her voice calm but filled with conviction. This land belongs to the earth. It belongs to the people who have lived here for centuries, and it will not be taken without a fight. Clayton's face twisted with contempt. You think your empty words will stop us? He said. We'll see about that. He spurred his horse forward, signaling for his men to follow. Jebediah and Kaya stood firm, side by side, ready for what was to come. The settlers might have the law on their side, but Jebediah and Kaya had something far more powerful, each other, and the land they were willing to fight for. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Jebediah felt a sense of determination like he had never known before. The fight for their home was just beginning, but he knew, deep down, that they would never back down. This was their land, their future, and they would protect it with everything they had. The battle had begun in earnest, but it was not the kind of fight Jebediah had imagined. The settlers came with more force this time, their numbers swelling as they staked out a claim on the land Jebediah and Kaya had worked so hard to build. The tension in the air was thick, and with each passing day, it became clear that this would not be a fight of fists and rifles, but of wills. Kaya and Jebediah stood side by side as the settlers encroached upon their land, their presence a constant reminder of the world outside, a world that wanted to reshape everything they had fought for. Kaya's resolve never wavered. She knew this land, knew its worth, its history, and the future it promised. But Jebediah, despite his strength and pride, felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had built a life here, a life that was now at risk. And yet, as he looked at Kaya, he realized that this fight was not just for land. It was for everything they had come to understand and build together. The settlers, led by Clayton Ward, made their move once again, demanding that Jebediah give up his land or face the consequences. Jebediah, with Kaya beside him, stood firm. You will not take what is ours, Jebediah said, his voice steady, unwavering. Clayton's smile twisted into a sneer. You don't have the power to stop us, he said, his words sharp. We've already claimed what we want, and no amount of stubbornness will change that. Kaya stepped forward, her eyes cold and unyielding. You do not understand the land you seek to take, she said, her voice low but powerful. It does not belong to you, and it will not bow to greed or force. Clayton's eyes narrowed as he looked at her, dismissing her. Words as those of a woman who didn't know her place. But he was wrong. Kaya knew exactly what she was saying, and she had the strength to back it up. The settlers, frustrated by the resistance, began to grow bolder, making threats and trying to provoke a fight. But Kaya and Jebediah held their ground. The land was theirs, and they would defend it with everything they had. And so, the days turned into weeks. Tensions ran high, but no shots were fired, no blood was spilled. Instead, Kaya and Jebediah worked the land together, side by side, showing the settlers that their strength was not in numbers or weapons, but in the quiet, steadfast resolve to protect what was theirs. The settlers tried to break their spirit, to force them into submission, but Kaya and Jebediah stood tall. As the sun set on the final day of the confrontation, Clayton Ward and his men rode away, defeated not by force, but by the quiet determination of two people who refused to give in. The land was still theirs, and the settlers, seeing that no amount of force could shake their resolve, would not return. Kaya and Jebediah stood together in the fading light, their hands still stained with the earth they had worked for so long. The land had been tested, but it had not broken. Neither had they. In that moment, Jebediah realized that this fight was never just about land. It was about something deeper. It was about the future they were building together, the life they had carved out, and the unbreakable bond that had been forged between them. The world outside would always be changing, always testing them, but together, they would face whatever came their way. And no one, no settler, no outsider, would ever take that from them. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, Jebediah and Kaya stood, hand in hand, looking out over the land they had saved. It was more than just land. It was their legacy, and it would remain theirs for as long as they lived.